Welcome to Talkless Water, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of water with those making waves. My name is Todd Bottler, and I'm your host for Talkless Water. I'm also the principal of Collaborative Water Resolution, which you can find at waterdisputes.org. In addition, I'm editor-in-chief of Texas West Water and the Texas Water Journal. Both publications are free. My guest today is Noelle George, the managing director of WateReuse Texas, which represents over 70 organizations working to ensure all future Texans have access to clean, safe water. Previously, Noelle was executive director of an international nonprofit advocating for global change in the areas of women's rights and disaster recovery through grant-making and volunteer organizing. She started her career as a pipeline engineer and capital project manager at Chevron, winning the Memorial Award from the International School of Hydrocarbon Measurement for her 2006 paper, Hydrocarbon Dew Point Effects on Gas Flow Measurement. Noelle has a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Washington with an environmental focus and considers herself a Pacific Northwest transplant to Houston. Noelle, welcome to Talkless Water, and thank you for making time to talk with me.
Sure. Thanks for having me here.
And going from the Northwest to Houston, I can say that is quite a transition, having spent some time in the Northwest. So how do you like Houston so far?
Well, I moved here a long time ago, so I've acclimated, but I used to say that moving to Houston from Seattle was like moving to another country. But then I did actually move to South Korea for a few years, so I don't really say that anymore.
Oh, wow. Okay.
At least we speak mostly the same language in Texas and Seattle.
Mostly the same. That's
mostly
right.
The same.
Yeah. So let's start out with your background in water. As I read in your bio, most of your career has been spent outside the water area. What made you want to switch your focus to water?
Well, as you said in my bio, I started out in the oil and gas industry, and I was hoping with the environmental focus to my degree to work in the environmental group at Chevron. And I interned with them in college, but between the time I interned and started, they kind of had a standard path for engineers to go through, and it did not involve the environmental group. So, I spent a little bit more time there kind of getting trained in project management and engineering. And then I decided to move to a nonprofit, which is the one that you mentioned. And I worked there for about 10 years. The nonprofit was great, and I got a lot of great experience and great opportunities, but it wasn't technical. And I did miss kind of the technical aspect. And so when I was kind of looking at, okay, I want to get back into this, water just made sense. I was in Chevron pipeline. There's a lot of similar things in hydraulics and, project management and things that I've been able to apply here. And, the engineering background helps, but then my role is also very related to advocacy and volunteer organizing. So the nonprofit helps as well. So it's kind of my career sweet spot at this point is water.
Nice. So tell us about that sweet spot, WateReuse Texas. What is your organization about, and what are you doing?
Well, we were formed in 2005, actually. So next year will be our 20-year anniversary. We are a branch of a national arm of WateReuse Association. So they call us sections. There are 11 sections, and Texas is one of those sections. And so members, when they join, we're a trade association. So we have organizations join. All of their staff can get access to our benefits, and really they're joining the national as well as they can select a section. So it's kind of like joining two organizations in that they get access to the national committees and the national advocacy, as well as our state advocacy and state committees. And things are very different by state. So it's important that we have an on-the-ground focus to keep the pulse on what's happening in the state from a regulatory activism perspective.
Gotcha. So, what are your long-term and short-term goals for WateReuse Texas?
Well, I will say the board's long-term and short-term goals. Short-term, I would say that we are working to raise visibility of reuse as a viable alternative to provide Texans a sustainable, safe, reliable water supply. So we're creating tools to assist with that, identifying barriers that utilities face when implementing or planning to implement reuse into their water supply portfolio. And then, as we continue to identify barriers and opportunities, continuing to advocate to remove those or to develop tools to address things like, what to have before you approach TCQ in the permitting process, how to communicate with your customers and your community to kind of get out in front of the project and avoid public backlash. There's some very unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to reuse. So we really try to support folks through those.
Gotcha. And I think maybe you hinted at this a little bit, but there's more than one form of water reuse, and some of them probably catch the public's attention, more than others. And so, why don't you talk about the various forms of water reuse that you're working with?
Okay. Well, there's two main categories, and then there's kind of subcategories. So we have potable reuse, which I'm sure that all your listeners know, but I'll still explain just in case that, potable reuse involves drinking water, and non-potable reuse involves non-drinking water. And so potable reuse in Texas is classified under the type 1 water, and that's water that comes into contact with humans. And then the non-potable is more type 2. Non-potable can be anything from on-site reuse, as in like a smaller kind of treatment in a facility or a residential community that's taking the water that's collected from that community or that facility and treating it for a specific purpose. There's rainwater and groundwater collection. There's reuse research happening into produced water reuse. And then with potable, we really have indirect, which is sending it through an environmental buffer, or direct, which is not doing that.
And what, I guess, is the state of water reuse in Texas? And, how do you see Texas comparing to the rest of the U.S. in terms of water reuse?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have sections because every state and geographic area in the U.S. is so different. Some states are or have recently passed guidelines and regulations for direct potable reuse, which is kind of, the big attention getter of reuse. I think it's the one that kind of can come with the most challenges in terms of communicating with the public about. But other states are in the process of or have passed guidelines. Colorado and California have passed. Arizona and I believe Florida are kind of trying to work through things. So there are some states that are kind of further down that path than I would say Texas is. But Texas actually had the first DPR facility in the U.S. and other very innovative advances in reuse. And, with the recent changes in weather and the population growth that Texas communities are experiencing, we're really seeing a surge in interest of reuse as a potential solution to folks' water supply issues, not just kind of DPR or IPR projects, but also on-site reuse. There was a bill passed in the last legislative session that removed some barriers to utilities allowing for on-site black water reuse within their communities without kind of accepting some extra liability on their part. So this is the kind of thing that you hear about happening in larger cities like on the West and East Coast. the on-site reuse type.
So DPR, direct potable reuse, and IPR, indirect potable reuse, right?
That's
and those
right.
are both type 1 and they're for drinking water.
Yeah.
And so what's kind of the mix that you see in Texas, I guess, between, water reuse for potable uses and for non-potable uses? I mean, I would imagine, that there's a lot of non-potable water reuse in industrial facilities and maybe for irrigating golf courses and, other types of outside, outdoors irrigation.
Yeah.
Like that. Is that kind of like what really is, kind of leading the way so far? And now the, reuse associated with drinking water is now kind of, becoming the next big thing.
Yeah, I would say that with the exception of a few exceptions in the past, Wichita Falls and Big Spring, Texas, that most of the reuse that has happened in Texas so far is industrial or irrigation. A very large portion of the water that's used in Texas is agricultural/irrigation. So there are a lot of cities that are just doing that. McAllen, Gulf Coast Authority, some cities in Central Texas, San Antonio, Saws have been doing that type of reuse for a long time. And their famous river walk is actually reuse water.
That's right.
Probably many people know that, but
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So, there are also indirect projects in Texas, and then the few more well-known direct projects, the most notable being El Paso's recent direct-to-distribution DPR plant that's, going to be starting construction here pretty soon, I think. So I would say that the types of reuse and moving toward direct potable reuse, the types of solutions that folks are looking for are expanding. I think the bill last session helped, but also the water challenges are so huge for some communities that they have to do everything they can. And sometimes in the past, utilities have kind of progressed up. Maybe we do some industrial reuse, maybe we do some, agricultural reuse, and then, we're going to maybe do an IPR project, and then, we're going to do a DPR project. It seems like that reuse has been more gradual into the more and more advanced types or difficult types. And that's not necessarily happening now. And there's just a lot of expanded interest because of the water challenges in the Rio Grande Valley with Mexico, the treaty with Mexico and everything that's happening there, and the growth in Central Texas and some in North Texas, and then just the changing weather patterns that's kind of shifting our dry line east throughout the U.S. is causing communities that weren't necessarily having water supply challenges in the past and are now, or that they know they're going to in the future. So many of the reuse projects, the big projects like DPR and IPR, those are very, very long projects. So they need to be started well before the water is actually needed.
Gotcha. And so I guess would a typical DPR project be like a membrane plant? And would a typical IPR project be, taking the water and I guess putting it through some constructed wetlands or putting it back in a river and then taking it out again? Or what can you describe kind of the typical project for both those categories?
Well, I would say that there's no typical DPR or IPR. That's one of the challenges, is that the water is different, the community landscape is different. But I would say a good example of an IPR project is to, treat treat water that's collected via the community and then kind of put it into a lake or a wetlands or, some environmental buffer system. And then it kind of comes out later and gets blended, usually with other sources, and then gets treated at the community drinking water plant. And, for DPR, it can be more direct. One of the reasons that the El Paso plant is innovative and so unusual is that it's a direct to distribution DPR plant. So instead of having the water kind of, and I'm not involved in the project, so I may get something technical wrong here, but my understanding is that it's being treated. And then it's kind of going back through and then directly to the customer. So it's just a little bit, it needs more safeguards than a typical plant because it's not, it doesn't have as many steps as other DPR plants have had. So
I, just kind of thinking about those two categories that, you're probably familiar with the Bunker Sands wetland facility up in North Texas, where the North Texas Municipal Water District takes water from the Trinity and puts it through a series of wetlands to clean up, and then they pipe it back to Lake Lavon, I think. Does that qualify, or is that kind of that's the indirect, right?
Yeah, that's one of the indirect projects in Texas. Also, Wichita Falls is doing indirect reuse. I believe that they're pumping their treated water into, is it Lake Arrowhead? And then, taking it back at some point. I know they do a lot of testing at various places in Lake Arrowhead to kind of see what they've got. And then there's also, there's the John Bunker Sands, and then there's another wetland.
That's the one. Yeah. So that one is associated with Richland Chambers Reservoir, right? And I've been to both of those facilities, and I think the one that you're referring to there is maybe associated with the Tarrant Regional Water District. It
is. Yes, it is. I just the name of the wetland is escaping me right now, but yeah, those are some great examples of IPR projects where the end use of the water that goes through that environmental buffer is drinking water. And I know that El Paso has done and is maybe still doing IPR as well. So I think the potable types of reuse get kind of more visibility, but and they're also easier to track because they're not as common. But, the industrial, there's quite a bit of industrial and irrigation and on-site reuse. That's not necessarily black water. Like I visited a car wash in Houston that did recycled its waste wash water and put it through filtration and then reused it again and again. So, there's even de facto reuse, which is kind of, how you have a community upstream. They treat their water, they put it into, the stream or the river, whatever, goes downstream to another community. They're taking it out of the river and using it for their purposes. So really, all water is reused all the time. Right. There's no new water ever created. So, there's all sorts of jokes about it out there.
Oh, yeah. The one I used to hear a lot at conferences, someone would say, the good news is we're going to be drinking our wastewater in the future. The bad news is there's not enough of it. I have some friends who've been out to some of the direct potable reuse facilities you're talking about, and they told me that, the water comes out, it's so pure, they have to add some minerals into it to give it a taste or something, which I think is really interesting, how the technology can really, take wastewater and clean it up so efficiently.
Yeah. And we have the technology now. We have the treatment to be able to treat water to an incredibly pure standard. And, I think I learned the other day that, do you know how many reuse projects in the US have been canceled or derailed because they didn't have the technology that they needed? Have you heard this?
No.
Zero have been canceled or derailed because they can't do it. The main reasons that they get canceled are for other reasons, mainly public buy-in.
Right.
And so that's one of the areas that, we're focusing on providing resources for communities, especially smaller communities that may not have the resources to kind of hire a PR firm or hire folks to kind of help them develop a plan. So, we're looking at how can we, as we move through this challenging time with water supply, how can we ensure that communities can innovate in their water supply, whether that be reuse or otherwise, and have that flexibility. And a lot of it has to do with building public trust and building community buy-in.
Right. I've done some surveying recently among water utilities, and of course looked at the new state water plan, and I'm always a little surprised that there's not more water reuse projected in the future, or the utilities. These are mostly small utilities. Have not indicated a preference for water reuse among other options. And, some of that I think is just, it's maybe that, people are not as comfortable with the idea, or they haven't been introduced to it, or seen a plant, or see how they operate. Because, for me, any water that you have already and can figure out a way to reuse it and stretch your supply, it's so much easier than having to go out and acquire a new source of water, since, what is out there still is not inexpensive. All the inexpensive water supplies have been developed. And so everything else is really expensive. And often there's, competition or conflict associated with developing a new water supply. But, that's not the case with water reuse. What do you think is maybe the reason why we don't see as much water reuse, projected in, for example, the state water plan or being discussed by these smaller water utilities?
Well, I would say that there is a certain point at which a community is so small that something like DPR or IPR is not economically viable. So you have to have a certain size of a community together to collect enough water and treat it to make it economically viable. And that's one of the studies that our research committee has been looking into lately as a possible something to coordinate. I do think that, and we are doing now a survey of Texas water providers and those who support water providers, reuse-related businesses like manufacturers or engineering firms, to kind of try to see what are some of the barriers that they are experiencing, especially because we have an opportunity before the legislative session that there are some interim charges related to reuse for the House Natural Resources Committee. So, we are and have been surveying our members, as well as we're hoping to get information from others to kind of see what the legislative priorities should be going into the next session. I think it might be a little intimidating. Reuse has some very unique challenges from a regulatory perspective. In potable DPR reuse, it's permitted as an exception process, so there's not necessarily a clear path. It can take many years. There's also kind of the concern about community buy-in or community resistance. There's also, some of the smaller utilities may have funding challenges, or, resources to kind of research some of those things, because it does require a lot of planning. We're doing a planning workshop related to reuse projects at our upcoming conference in Austin, and that's September 9th through 11th. So, we do try to kind of identify areas where there are challenges and provide opportunities for folks to address those challenges. But I think we're going to continue to see interest in reuse growing, and we're going to continue to be able to identify opportunities to provide resources for utilities to help them, and other water providers to help them, know what they need to consider when planning for reuse. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. In my opinion, you kind of hit on a major issue there in terms of what I call fragmentation in terms of our water management. We've got 7,000 water utilities in Texas, and most of them are very small. But, that tells you that, people are kind of used to like having their own individual systems, right? And, and the more expensive options in the future that everybody's going to have to avail themselves of, right? Because they're really the only options, require some significant level of coordination among these entities. And so especially the small ones who you're not financially going to be able to build a, direct potable reuse project or indirect potable reuse project. And so, when I'm thinking of kind of the issues that are limiting more rapid, widespread adoption of water use in Texas, fragmentation is at the top of my list, but what are some other ones? You hit on community resistance. Is that the big one? And can you talk to us about that some? How you overcome it, maybe? Or
I would say that is a big concern of a lot of utilities, because there's so much uncertainty around it. I think anything that has uncertainty around it is definitely a barrier. We do have tools on our website, and there have been studies and communication, plans developed for things like DPR that can be used for any type of reuse. And, those are not necessarily Texas focused, but they can be adapted to various communities. I would say uncertainty kind of in the regulatory permitting process, sometimes in the length of it, can be challenging. I would also say that, in Texas, we have several different places that reuse data is collected, but it's not really synthesized. And, in order to kind of know the potential for reuse going forward, we really need to understand what's happening now, and have, good effluent totals, and kind of be able to do a baseline study and see, where we at and what can we do. And I think for WateReuse Texas, identifying things like that and then working on, that would be another kind of barrier, is that it's hard for us to advocate for more reuse when we don't know, and we can't say and quantify, and this is the engineer speaking, but we can't quantify easily how much is happening now. So, that can make it difficult to advocate. So we're, as part of our engagement with the House Natural Resources Committee and the interim charges, we are, looking at all sorts of ways to, to increase reuse in Texas and increase opportunities for utilities to explore it as a viable option. And if it's not their option, then, that's up to them. We're not always going to say that everyone has to do reuse, but we want folks who do think it's a solution for them to be able to explore it and implement it without having, all the uncertainty and potential barriers.
Well, my guess is it's going to be ubiquitous, and maybe take longer than 20 years, but I'm not sure. It might be here sooner than that, given the possibility that we have another prolonged severe drought, and people realize, look, we've got to have additional supplies, and here's a source of water that we've already got, and we can implement this pretty quickly. I know there are delays, as you alluded to, in maybe the permitting, all that, but it doesn't take as long as it would to permit a new reservoir or something of that nature.
Yeah.
I'm really thinking that kind of the most effective way to get people interested in it is to get them to the plants where they're doing it, and see how it's being done, and you have a chance to sample the water that comes out, and it's I think that takes some of the mystery out of it, and maybe that's one of the issues is that people just not familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted education strategy. So we need to educate water providers about what's possible, about the tools that have been developed to help address some of the challenges related to reuse, about how we can provide support. But we also, I think it's important for us to play a role in educating the public in the community about, that it's not where the water has come from. It's how it's been treated and what it's being used for. And, I think that if we can do that on a widespread scale, then we can, begin to remove some of the challenges that water providers in both large and small Texas communities experience when they're thinking about projects. And really reuse, like large reuse projects, take 10, 20 years to plan, on-site reuse, and working with developers to implement various, conservation measures and other things like that can happen much more quickly and can avoid, large expansions. It's not like they're never going to happen, but it can help delay that a little bit. So there's lots of strategies involving reuse that don't include these major projects that can be implemented by a community to address their water supply needs. So it's not just, we're going to help you, or you hire a firm and they, help you plan a project, but there's, incentives like what City of Austin is doing with their developers, providing developers incentives and supporting them in implementing measures through their No Go Purple program. So people are really innovating when it comes to reuse, and they're going to continue to innovate. And there's going to continue to be a need for folks with their hand on the pulse of what's happening, not just technology wise, but also, through strategic partnerships and other solutions.
That sounds great. So let's move to our final question. How can our listeners learn more about water reuse and WateReuse Texas? And you did allude to your conference. Tell us, that's maybe part of your answer. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have our conference coming up in Austin. It's going to be September 9th through 11th, and we are co-locating with the Texas Desalination Association. So we're having our conference the first half of the week, and then they're having theirs the second half of the week. It's going to be at the Austin Permitting and Development Center. And we're going to have a tour there of their Oscar and Clara system, which is their on-site reuse systems. And so we have workshops, including, like I mentioned, a planning workshop, a funding workshop that we partnered with Water Finance Exchange to put on. We have our Reuse 101 workshop, which is great for the reuse basics, just a very high-level overview for those that aren't familiar. And then we have a ton of great content, including a keynote speaker from the NASA engineer who works on the water reuse system on the International Space Station. So we're very excited. Panels and various breakout presentations and a networking reception. So it's going to be a great time. We're still, we still have registration open for a little while longer. You can just Google WateReuse Texas to find our website, or, follow links provided in the episode description that you have here that we're going to put together. And, we also table at Texas Water, and we do various educational podcasts throughout the year. We usually have a happy hour that we co-host with WateReuse Committee at Texas Water. So there's a lot of touch points throughout the year to get engaged with us. And, we have members of all different utility sizes, reuse-related businesses, universities. Texas State is a member.
Ah, okay.
We and we're various nonprofit entities. The regulatory agencies are also members, technically. So, we just bring all sorts of different organizations together to advocate for reuse and, to help all Texans have, our goal is to help all Texans have safe and clean water through 2070 and beyond.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to dropping by your conference when it's here in Austin, and starting on September 9th, right? And maybe having a chance to meet your water expert from NASA.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this topic. It's one that I don't really know as much about as I'd like to. And you've kind of laid out the way that I can learn more about it. And so I appreciate that.
Sure. Happy to do that anytime.
Great. So thank you, Noelle, for joining us today. And let me just say again that Noelle George is the Managing Director of WateReuse Texas, which represents over 70 organizations working to ensure that all future Texans have access to clean and safe water. This has been Talkless Water. I want to thank you, the listener, for spending your valuable time on this podcast. And finally, I want to give a big thank you to Anna Huff at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University for getting each episode of Talkless Water ready to go. My name is Todd Bottler. Let's talk water again soon.